Welcome to the Briefing PM, an hour of the latest political news, debate and analysis here on GB News. I'm Darren McCaffrey, and here's what's coming up between now and 4 o'clock. Prime Minister Boris Johnson is under pressure to reveal what exactly he knew in regards to allegations of inappropriate behaviour around Chris Pincher when he was appointed as Deputy Chief Whip. It's a big story dominating Westminster. We'll have all the latest reaction from Parliament this afternoon. Also, Keir Starmer set to reveal Labour's Brexit policy tonight, which will strictly state that Labour will not seek to rejoin the single market or the customs union. And he'll also lay into Boris Johnson, who he says has missed Brexit opportunities time and again. But can the Labour Party be trusted? And Donald Trump is likely to announce an early but much expected 2024 presidential run from Florida this month. Could this all be a distraction from the ongoing Capitol riot hearing? We'll have the latest on that. And as always, please do get in touch with your views. You know the email now. It's gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at gbnews. All that between now and 4. Stay tuned. We're also going to have the Prime Minister live in Parliament as well. But first, at the top of the hour, let's bring you the latest news.
Thanks, Darren. Good afternoon. It's just 1 minute past 3. Let's get you up to date here on GB News. At least 2 people have been injured, one seriously, following a gas explosion in Bedford. We can go live to the scene now. Our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, is there. Mark, what more can you tell us?
Well, all 3 emergency services are still here at the scene of that explosion in Redwood Grove in Bedford earlier today. I'm just going to pop out of the way just now to give you a shot at the building behind, and you can see that building is pretty much all of the flats, 20 flats inside the apartment complex have been destroyed. The emergency services have managed to extinguish the flames. You can still see there are some puffs of smoke that come up from the buildings occasionally, but the fire, the main seat of the fire, is out. What is now happening, of course, is that urban search and rescue to make sure that there are no more victims. We know that 2 people have been taken to hospital, one suffering from serious injuries. I spoke a short time ago to Baljit Mumman, who is a local resident, and she described the scene.
My cousin just said that she was sleeping and then she woke up from the big bang and she'd wondered what has gone on, and then she went next door to see her parents to just check on them. They too obviously felt the same, just wondering what was going on, but yeah, it gave them a real fright, really.
Well, thankfully, at about 9:30 in the morning, a lot of people will have left that building and will have been at work, but there were certainly residents inside, and we know of these 2 people injured. The other residents have been taken to a nearby community centre as the local authority tries to determine what exactly to do with them in terms of rehousing them. They won't be able to go back into that particular apartment complex. It's likely, I think, looking at the level of the destruction there, that the whole apartment complex may have to be demolished.
Mark, thank you very much. Live for us on the scene there in Bedford. Of course, we'll keep you up to date on developments here on GB News. In other news now, the Prime Minister was aware of concerns about Chris Pincher's behaviour when he made him Deputy Chief Tory Whip. Downing Street says, despite knowing about speculations, Boris Johnson did not think it was appropriate to block his appointment. The Prime Minister is alleged to have called him Pincher by name, Pincher by nature. The MP was suspended from the Conservative Party and resigned after claims emerged he groped 2 men last week. 6 new allegations have emerged since, dating back several years, all of which Mr Pincher denies. The shooting in Copenhagen is not thought to be linked to terror, with Danish police saying there's no evidence to support that. At least 3 people were killed and 4 injured when a gunman opened fire in one of the biggest shopping centres in the country yesterday. Video from outside of the complex shows shoppers running away. Witnesses say others hid inside. A 22-year-old Danish man is appearing in court today. Well, Peter Nordsmark's daughter was in the shopping centre when the shooting started.
Yeah, it was terrible because she was calling me that there are gunshots in fields, there's a shooting, I'm running out, and I heard in the background as he said that, these 2 boom, boom, something like that, I could hear it.
12 protesters have been arrested on suspicion of committing a public order offence after go-slow motorway demonstrations today against high fuel prices. There's been significant disruption on the M4 in South Wales and the M5 from Devon to Bristol as protesters deliberately slowed down their vehicles. The Severn Bridge was closed for over an hour this morning. Police told demonstrators they could not stop and must drive no slower than 30 miles per hour. It's as the price of petrol hit a record high of more than 191 pence per litre. Protester Vicky Stamper says she lost her job as a lorry driver because she couldn't afford to fill up.
People need to realise that the government works for us, not the other way around. And I think a lot of people have mistaken that. And they need to pull the head out the backsides, basically, and wake up to this. Because it's not going to end until something gets done.
An EasyJet flight to Menorca had to be escorted to its destination by a Spanish fighter jet. It's after a British teenager on board allegedly posted a bomb threat on social media. An 18-year-old was arrested and is due to appear in court. And EasyJet's chief operating officer, Peter Bellew, has resigned amid a series of flight cancellations and delays over the last few months. The airline's struggling with industry-wide staff shortages that have forced it to axe flights, often on the day they're due to depart over the holiday period. EasyJet's CEO said everyone at the airline was focused on delivering reliable services this summer. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to Darren for this afternoon's briefing.
Thank you very much indeed, Rosie. It is 7 minutes past 3 o'clock on this Monday afternoon. We're on TV, online and, of course, on your wireless radio. Thank you very much indeed for your company. Only really one big political story in town today, and that is that Boris Johnson, yet again, is under mounting pressure to reveal exactly what he knew around allegations of inappropriate behaviour concerning Chris Pincher when he was appointed Deputy Chief Whip earlier on this year. After claims emerged that he groped two men, Mr Pincher resigned as Deputy Chief Whip last week. Of course, being a Chief Whip or a Deputy Chief Whip, you're meant to uphold discipline among fellow Tory MPs. But he told the Prime Minister he got far too drunk and embarrassed himself. Well, Mr Pincher now faces 6 new claims of inappropriate behaviour stretching back several years, which he denies. So, let's get the very latest now from Westminster. Join our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, who's there for us. Good afternoon, as always, Tom. Thank you. And we've heard a little bit of a change in the story, haven't we, from Number 10? Very much over the weekend, we were led to believe the Prime Minister didn't know anything at all. Now we're told he did know things, but he thought that in the end they'd been concluded.
That's right. Of course, there was an investigation into Chris Pincher back in 2017 about allegations made about him from the previous decade. Well, that investigation found Chris Pincher innocent of what he was accused of doing then, and the argument of Number 10 now is that given that particular investigation into that particular allegation, he was found to be innocent. That was then believed to be the situation. However, of course, there had been rumours around Chris Pincher for a long time in Westminster, and there's the argument, of course, that there's no smoke without fire. However, clearly, there are some rumours that aren't true and some that are when it comes to any individual in Westminster, and it's tricky to weigh up those concerns. Now, it's interesting to look at when Chris Pincher was appointed Deputy Chief Whip back in February this year. He went into Downing Street that afternoon, and people standing outside watching about who was going in and who was coming out noted that it wasn't until around 7 p.m. that he was actually finally appointed Deputy Chief Whip. There had been speculation he'd be appointed Chief Whip, and potentially the discussion, the debate and the long stretch of time there was because some of these concerns may well have been brought up. It's interesting that we got no firm denial this morning from the Prime Minister's official spokesman that that the Prime Minister had used the nickname Pincher by name, Pincher by nature. That, of course, is the allegation of Dominic Cummings. No firm denial from the Prime Minister's official spokesman. But Darren, it's only a little bit of time until we will hear from the Prime Minister himself. At 3:30 this afternoon, he'll be standing up in front of the dispatch box of the House of Commons. He'll be making a statement, of course, on the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, on the G7 and on the NATO, of those series of summits that took place over the course of the last 2 weeks. But undoubtedly, the questions that will then follow will, especially from the opposition benches, be focusing on what the Prime Minister knew and when with regards to the Christopher Pincher affair. Likely we'll hear probably more questions from the opposition on that than on the actual substance of the statement on those international visits.
Yeah, indeed, and we'll have, of course, full coverage, live coverage from the Commons of that, I think in around 20 minutes' time at 1:30. Tom, though, isn't there a sense, you speak to Conservative MPs a lot, that there's frustration, isn't there, that yet again, here we are, another week, another scandal. I think someone had concluded it had been 6 or 7, really, in the last couple of months of Conservative MPs, and even a sense amongst ministers they're getting quite tired of having to defend all of this.
Certainly, it's becoming a bit of a poisoned chalice to be a government minister who goes out at a morning broadcast rounds and tries to defend a government position that then shifts only a matter of hours later. How often has that taken place? Of course, back on Thursday evening when this story about Chris Pincher broke, initially the government didn't remove the whip from him. It was only until the next day when a formal complaint was lodged with the Independent Parliamentary Grievance Scheme that that whip was then withdrawn, almost 24 hours after the allegations first bubbled up in the press. No, it does seem that this government has been shifting position on these issues, but also a lot of these issues are historic. There are people who have been accused of doing things many years ago that now the Westminster conversation is focused on Pestminster, on this scandal, on any sort of sexual impropriety. All of these stories are being dug up at this particular moment. Now, they didn't all happen at the time of this particular government, but they're all bubbling up now, and that does create a big political problem. And perhaps there's a bigger political problem than when this all last bubbled up under Theresa May. We'll remember the first wave of Pestminster stories when there were so many different stories. Potentially, the Prime Minister's weakened position at this moment in time makes this story a bit worse for the government. Had the economy been going gangbusters, had the Partygate scandal not happened, potentially a stronger Prime Minister would be able to weather this better too. But as it stands, this is undoubtedly a weakened Prime Minister.
Tom, as always, thank you very much. Tom Harwood there at Westminster for us this afternoon. GB Views at gbnews.uk. If you've got a view on all of this, let's bring in Conservative Councillor Claire Purcell, who joined us down the line. Claire, very good afternoon to you. Yet again, you and I have talked an awful lot about this, haven't we, in the past, about these allegations. I mean, you've been at Westminster for a long time, been a Westminster watcher. Is this an insight into what has always gone on? How serious is all of this in the sense of how damaging is it to Parliament and its reputation, and also maybe more particularly to the Conservative Party?
Well, I think it's incredibly damaging. I don't think anybody could sit and talk about this without looking at what it's doing to the view of politics as a whole. It brings the House into disrepute, and I think we've spoken about it before, that these are not new allegations, and over the years, over the decades, we've all seen these stories coming out. However, I think at the moment we are seeing a series of them. We are also seeing a very, very weakened Prime Minister, as Tom quite rightly said, who is not dealing with these matters quickly. And I think therein lies sort of half of the problem, is that when you are faced with these kind of problems coming up, you need to be able to deal with it quickly and shut down the news. Now, this story broke last Thursday evening, but it's taken until really today before we've seen any comment from the government.
And just in regards to what kind of happens next in all of this, you know, we know that many MPs, and I was speaking to Neil Parish this morning. You'll get to see that interview on GB News tomorrow. He's pretty angry that he was essentially forced out within 24 hours or so, forced to resign as an MP. You know, it took a while for Chris Pincher to lose the whip. I mean, is it your expectation? Can he hold on to being an MP? Could the government, and it's not just him, there's other MPs with allegations as well, could the government be facing another series of by-elections?
I suspect so. I'm not sure how much you would be able to stay in your position and hold the line that you're very, very sorry and you really want to get back to your duties when you've got your own colleagues saying, this isn't the greatest look in the world, and do you think perhaps you should reconsider? But also, more importantly, his constituents will have a view. A couple of his councillors up in his Tamworth seat have already made the call on social media that Christopher Pincher needs to consider his position. That's quite fighting talk, and we haven't really seen that in previous things. As you say, with Neil Parish, that all managed very quickly, and I'm not surprised that he's angry. When you look at what he did, yes, it was wrong. I wouldn't ever defend that. But in the prism of sexual assault, his is quite low down on the crime list. But he went, and he did an honourable thing by resigning quickly. I'm not sure that Mr. Pincher will continue being an MP past the next few weeks. I think this is a really crucial moment, and it feels really febrile. The whole environment in Westminster is uncomfortable. Nobody thinks it can continue, and I really hope the Prime Minister comes up with some news for us all soon.
And just finally in all of this, Claire, I mean, what is it? Is it because Parliament's massively scrutinised and these are public figures and so their indiscretions, their evils, their wrongs get rooted out and are very publicly publicised? Or is this a bit more fundamental with Parliament, that for whatever reason, whether politics attracts certain types of characters or whether the police itself in some ways allows this behaviour to happen? What do we think it is? I'm trying to work out, essentially, are politicians reflective of the rest of society, or are they not in many regards?
I think it's pretty much a combination of all the things that you've just said. One of which is parliamentarians, by their very nature, are quite risk-taking. And they like that cut and thrust of that world. You have to be a certain character in order to want to put yourself forward for this level of scrutiny. But there is also this social media side and 24-hour rolling news, which we didn't have in the past, which I think has made things reportable and a lot quicker, and people react to it a lot quicker. But there is also sort of another thread that runs through it, is people now have the ability and the guts, I think, the courage to come forward and tell their stories. And with the hope that they may well be believed. And I think that is all changing. So it's an accumulation of all of those things. I don't think it's any one thing, but how we deal with it now going forward, especially in the Conservative Party, is of utmost importance.
OK, Claire, as always, thank you very much indeed. Claire Purcell there joining us down the line from Kent. Thank you, Claire. OK, we'll take a quick break here on GB News. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, we're going to be talking to Michael Fabricant. We're going to be hearing live from the Prime Minister in the Commons. He's due to address MPs in just under 10 minutes' time. And Labour's Brexit policy. Keir Starmer's been setting out a new 5-point plan today. But do you trust Labour on Brexit? That and much more. Just a couple of minutes.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. A lot of cloud across the UK today with showers in the north, but mostly fine in the south where some brighter spells are coming through from time to time. Low pressure sits to the north of the UK, just beside Iceland. High pressure to the west, that's trying to move in and it will eventually bring more settled weather more widely later this week. But for the time being, it's fairly cool. It's fairly changeable out there, a lot of cloud cover and some showers continuing into the evening for northern England, Scotland, as well as Northern Ireland. Eventually the showers become confined to northern and northwestern coasts, drier with clear spells elsewhere, and temperatures falling away, single figures in some sheltered spots, so a cool night to come. But a bright start to Tuesday for many, with the best of the sunshine in the south and the east, areas of cloud elsewhere, and again a few showers coming into North Wales, northwest England and parts of northern Scotland. Scotland sees some sunshine for a time, as well as northern England and North Wales, but further south a lot of cloud cover, and as a result temperatures not far from average. We're looking at high teens, low 20s in many spots. Outbreaks of rain then turn up for Western Scotland and Northern Ireland, and that rain becomes heavier and more persistent over the Western Hills of Scotland in particular, with outbreaks of rain sinking into North Wales, Northern England, Eastern Scotland, as well as Northern Ireland at times. Wednesday morning then begins with clear spells in the south and 14 or 15 Celsius, but outbreaks of rain and a gusty wind further north. Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England, changeable weather through much of the day. Rain on and off, that blustery wind and more persistent wet weather continuing for western parts of Scotland, particularly over the higher ground. Thursday and Friday sees more widely drier and brighter weather develop, and temperatures, especially in the south, will rise up to the high 20s by Friday.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
Very welcome back to GB News and The Briefing. Let's return to our main story today, and that is, of course, the pressure on Boris Johnson to explain precisely what he knew and when about Chris Pincher, before he was appointed Deputy Chief Whip earlier on this year. Let's speak to Michael Fabricant, a Conservative MP for Lichfield, who, as you can see, is live outside for Parliament for us this afternoon. Michael, as always, thank you. Someone said today the dogs on the streets around where you are knew what Chris Pincher was like. Did you? It does seem that lots of your colleagues did.
Well, I think some of my colleagues may or may not have had suspicions, but, he's my next-door neighbour. He represents Tamworth, and I can't say that, it was particularly obvious to me. This place is a rumour mill behind me, And lots of people are accused of lots of things, and some even worse. And maybe it's just me, but I sort of don't always assume that what you hear as gossip is true.
Aside from that, and as you rightly point out, these are just allegations, but frankly, did the Prime Minister act too late? Was he too slow to remove the whip, given that it's happened much more quickly in the past with other MPs?
Well, I think with other MPs, there was a very, very clear case. It was very, very black and white. It wasn't black and white. As soon as, however, a formal complaint was made, the Prime Minister did remove the whip. You know what? If the Prime Minister has two weaknesses, it's one, believing that you're innocent until you're proven guilty, and the second one is loyalty. And, you know, Chris Pincher had been loyal to him, and I guess he wanted to be loyal to Chris Pincher. But it would have been equally wrong, you know, to condemn Chris Pincher, take away the whip and all the rest of it before even a complaint was made. One of the issues which has been in the newspaper, which Chris Pincher is alleged to have been involved with, was not only denied by Chris Pincher, but then was subsequently denied by the victim. So some of it you really do have to take with a pinch of salt.
But this was also a man who had previously lost his job in government because of similar allegations. And additionally, you know, what we believe happened last week was witnessed by one of your colleagues, by another Conservative MP.
Yeah, that's right. Don't forget, not that I'm condoning it, but the guy was drunk. He had real problems and still does, Chris Pincher, on that front. And what I do know is that Chris Pincher has now been referred to a clinical psychiatrist and he is getting treatment for this. It's just such a shame that it didn't happen sooner. Shame for those who were the victims, and a shame also for Chris Pincher, who's a decent guy. And you know, one of the saddest things of all, I think, is that Chris Pincher has got rather embroiled with those people who are very, very anti-Boris Johnson and are now using Chris Pincher, the same old people who voted against Boris Johnson because of Brexit and all the rest of it in the Conservative Party, and are now using Chris Pincher as an excuse to attack Boris again.
That is interesting, isn't it? I think there's no doubt about that, though, of course, Chris Pincher was quite heavily involved in trying to maintain support for the Prime Minister, wasn't he? But frankly, isn't this a sign that his enemies are again circling? The Prime Minister is a weakened figure in many regards.
Well, I think Tom was saying earlier on that he's a weakened figure. Look, Prime Ministers go through rough patches, particularly in the middle of a governmental term. And there's no question that Boris is going through a rough patch. But I don't know anybody who's got the imagination that Boris has to have achieved what he's done, you know, not only with Brexit, not only with the vaccine programme and COVID, but also with the Ukraine war. And I think that Boris will get through it. And I think when people start to really analyse what has happened with Chris Pincher, precisely who actually were the victims, and which allegations have been made which actually are not true at all. And in fact, as I said earlier on, at least one victim, or someone who's been identified as a victim, has since said, well, actually, the event didn't happen. I think eventually, you know, people will begin to take this whole thing in perspective, and we will move on. And of course, we've only heard today about the BBC having to make a massive apology over one of their Radio 1 DJs. A separate issue, but it's one that isn't confined to Parliament.
No, indeed. We see it in all aspects of life. But at the same time, is there a sense now that MPs, your colleagues, I mean, maybe even you yourself, Michael, and you're pretty robust. You're a bit like a Duracell bunny, as in you can keep going if you like, but that they're getting a bit frustrated, a bit annoyed, a bit sick to the back teeth of it, if you like, about constantly having to defend the government, to defend the Prime Minister, defend his actions, to defend your colleagues in the party. It does seem that kind of almost week in, week out now, that ministers and people like yourself are constantly having to come on the TV and the radio and defend what the government's doing, that it's weighing down the party, weighing down the government.
Yes, I understand that, and some people have said, you know, this reminds them of how it was in the 1990s under John Major, where there was one problem after another with various MPs either involved in sex scandals or in financial brown paper envelope scandals or whatever. Of course, to get the balance right, you have to remember that there are situations at the moment with Claudia Webber and other on the Labour front. You've got a Labour MP who's accepted, what was it, £250,000? I can't remember the exact amount, but whatever it was huge, from the Communist Party of China. Of course, that doesn't mitigate any of this that's happening with the Conservative government. And of course, it's because we're in government that the focus falls on us. And yes, we are getting weary, but these things are not connected with the Prime Minister. Unfortunately, the event that happened with Chris Pincher happened on Wednesday night, actually. And, you know, let's hope we'll have no more of it. We certainly won't from him. Let's hope we'll have no more of it from any other MPs either.
And just one final quick question, in one word if you can, Michael. Do you think he will survive as an MP?
One word? Yes.
One word, please.
I think he will.
OK. OK. Michael, as always, really appreciate the time this afternoon. Thank you so much. Michael Fabricant there, the MP, Conservative MP for Lichfield. Now, we are hoping to hear from the Prime Minister imminently in the House of Commons. We'll take you there live when he gets on his feet. He's going to be talking about, of course, CHOGM, the Commonwealth Heads meeting in Rwanda last week, alongside NATO and the G7. While we can, let's try and squeeze in a little bit about Keir Starmer, Labour and its Brexit policy. Let's bring in Peter Edwards, former editor of Labour List, who joined us down the line. Peter, we might have to cut this short, unfortunately, depending on the Prime Minister. Just talk us through what we're likely to hear, though, from the Labour leader tonight. He's setting out a 5-point plan of Labour's strategy on Brexit.
Well, this is more of a technical speech, but clearly it's going to prompt a huge debate in the media, because we all know the issues Labour's had with Brexit in the past. It's stuff like a veterinary agreement, getting low-risk goods into Northern Ireland, professional qualifications, policing and security, stuff like that. So these are quite technical measures as part of a 5-point plan, but notably what he's committing to, again, is not to rejoin the single market, not to rejoin the customs union, not to sign up for free movement. So to my mind, and I know there'll be a debate, but there's no question he's trying to, that he could be accused of trying to unwind the result of the referendum. He is honouring the result of the referendum.
In saying that, I'm sure you're very aware of this. There's a lot of people out there, maybe a lot of our viewers as well, who feel that given what Keir Starmer did in the past, that can he be trusted on this? Is he just saying it because it's politically expedient rather than what he believes?
I think that's a legitimate question, but I think Labour has a perfectly legitimate answer. You know, bear in mind, Westminster was something close to paralysis for several years under Theresa May, and then we've now got a Boris Johnson deal that is so bad that Boris Johnson is trying to can parts of it. And I actually had a quick look back at Labour's last manifesto, because in the 3 years since December 2019, there have been so many accusations against Labour going back on the result. And it contains the words, Labour will give the people the final say on Brexit. A public vote, a Labour government will implement whatever the people decide. So I think that was an attempt to break Theresa May's logjam, avoid a bad deal of the like seen under Boris Johnson, and put the decision in the fate of the people. Now, clearly, that got incredibly mixed reception, but it's a principled view.
Peter,
in large parts of the country, it went down okay.
I said we were going to do this, and I apologise. Thank you, Peter Edwards, there on Labour. Let's go to the Commons,
Governments,
though.
nearly half the
Prime
entire
Minister.
membership of the United Nations, and hold bilateral talks with over 25 leaders, ranging from the new presidents of South Korea and Zambia to the Prime Ministers of Japan and Jamaica, demonstrating the global reach of Britain's diplomacy and the value of our presence at the world's top tables. Our immediate priority is to join with our allies to ensure that Ukraine prevails in her brave struggle against Putin's aggression. At the Madrid summit, NATO exceeded all expectations in the unity and single-minded resolve of the alliance to support Ukraine for as long as it takes, and to explode the myth that Western democracies lack the staying power for a prolonged crisis. All of us understand that if Putin is not stopped in Ukraine, he will find new targets for his revanchist attacks, and we are not defending some abstract ideal, but the first principle of a peaceful world, which is that large and powerful countries cannot be allowed to dismember their neighbours. And if this was ever permitted, then no nation anywhere would be safe. Therefore, our goal must be for our Ukrainian friends to win, by which I mean that Ukraine must have the strength to finish this war on the terms that President Zelensky has described. And when Putin claimed that by invading his neighbour he would force NATO away from Russia, he could not have been proved more spectacularly wrong, because the single most welcome outcome of the Madrid summit was the alliance's agreement to admit Finland and Sweden. And I hope I speak for the whole House when I say that Britain will be proud to stand alongside these fellow democracies and reaffirm our unshakable pledge to come to their aid and defend them if ever necessary, just as they would for us. We were glad to smooth their path into NATO by giving both nations the security assurances they needed to apply for membership. And when I met Prime Minister Andersson of Sweden and President Niinistö of Finland last Wednesday, I told them I was certain that NATO would be stronger and safer for their accession. Before Putin's onslaught, both countries had prized their neutrality even through all the crises of the Cold War. And it's a measure of how seriously they take today's threat that opinion in Sweden and Finland has been transformed. And it speaks volumes about Putin's folly that one permanent consequence of his attack on Ukraine will be a doubling of the length of NATO's border with Russia. If anyone needed proof that NATO is purely defensive, the fact that two quintessentially peaceable countries should have chosen to join demonstrates the true nature of our alliance. Yeah. And now is the time to intensify our help for Ukraine, because Putin's Donbass offensive is slowing down and his overstretched army is suffering heavy casualties. And Ukraine's success in forcing the Russians off Snake Island by sheer weight of firepower shows how difficult the invader will find it to hold the territory he has overrun. We need to equip our friends now to take advantage of the moment when Putin will have to pause and regroup. So NATO will supply Ukraine with another £1 billion of military aid, including air defences, drones and electronic warfare equipment, bringing our total military, humanitarian and economic support since the 24th of February to nearly £4 billion. And to guarantee the security of our allies on the eastern flank, NATO agreed in Madrid to bolster its high readiness forces, and we in the UK will offer even more British forces to the alliance, including almost all of our surface fleet. We have already doubled our deployment in Estonia, and we will upgrade our national headquarters to be led by a brigadier and help our Estonian friends to establish their own divisional headquarters. If you follow the trajectory of our programmes to modernise our armed forces, Mr. Speaker, you will draw the logical conclusion that the UK will likely be spending 2.5% of GDP on defence by the end of this decade. Earlier, at the G7 summit, the first full day of talks coincided with a Russian missile destroying a Ukrainian shopping centre, killing at least 18 people. This barbaric attack on an obviously civilian target strengthened the resolve of my fellow leaders to provide Ukraine with more financial, humanitarian, military and diplomatic backing for, and I quote the communiqué again, as long as it takes. Exactly the terms later echoed by NATO. The G7 has pledged nearly $30 billion of financial support for Ukraine this year, and we will tighten our sanctions on Russia, and the UK will join America, Japan and Canada to ban the import of Russian gold, which previously raised more export revenues than anything else except hydrocarbons. The G7 will devise more options for ensuring that nearly 25 million tons of grain trapped inside Ukraine by Putin's blockade reaches the countries that rely on these supplies. Just as the world economy was recovering from the pandemic, Putin's war has caused a surge in global food and energy prices, raising the cost of living everywhere, including here at home. The G7 agreed, and I quote, to take immediate action to secure energy supply and reduce price surges, including by exploring additional measures such as price caps. And we will help our partners in the developing world to meet their climate targets and transform millions of lives by constructing new infrastructure according to the highest standards of transparency and environmental protection. Through our Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, an idea launched by the UK at the Cardiff Bay Summit last year, we will mobilise up to $600 billion of public and private investment over the next 5 years. Many beneficiary nations will be members of the Commonwealth, and I was very pleased to attend the summit in Kigali of this unique association of 56 states encompassing a third of humanity. More countries are eager to join, and we were pleased to welcome 2 new members in Gabon and Togo. It's an amazing fact that our familiar legal and administrative systems, combined with the English language, knock 21% off the cost of trade between Commonwealth members. And it's because the Commonwealth unites that advantage with some of the fastest growing markets in the world that we're using the sovereignty that the UK has regained to sign free trade or economic partnership agreements with as many Commonwealth countries as possible. So far, we've done 33, including Australia and New Zealand, and we're aiming for India by Diwali in October. But it's true, Mr. Speaker, that not every member of the Commonwealth sees Putin's aggression as we do, or exactly as we do. And it was vital to have the opportunity to counter the myths and to point out that food prices are rising because Putin has blockaded one of the world's biggest food producers. And if large countries are free to destroy their neighbours, then no Commonwealth member, however distant from Ukraine, would be genuinely secure. The fact that in a week the UK was able to deal on friendly terms with scores of countries in 3 organisations shows the extraordinary diplomatic assets our country possesses. And as we stand up for what is right in Ukraine and advance the values and interests of the British people, I commend this statement to the House.
I now call Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for an advance copy of his statement and to welcome him back to these shores. They say that absence makes the heart grow fonder. So I wish him the best of luck in seeing if that works as a party management strategy. Mr. Speaker, it's been 131 days since Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. 131 days of war at the heart of our continent. 131 days of Putin trying to cower his neighbours. 131 days of brave Ukrainian resistance. I've always said that this House and Britain's allies must put aside our differences in other areas and show unity in our opposition to Putin's aggression. And we have, driven by the inspiration provided by the people of Ukraine and the leadership and courage of President Zelensky. As this conflict reaches its 6th month and drags on in eastern Ukraine, it's important that we don't think our job is done. Putin would like nothing better than for us to lose our focus, for the grip of sanctions to weaken, for military aid to Ukraine to dry up, or for cracks to appear in the unity of Putin's opponents. So I welcome the progress made at the NATO summit last week and congratulate our good friends in Finland and Sweden for their formal invitation to join the NATO alliance. And of course Ukraine on securing their candidate status to join the European Union. I hope these processes can be concluded as quickly as possible to send a clear message to Putin that his war has permanently changed the European landscape, but not in the way that he planned. I also welcome the commitment to strengthen our collective deterrent capabilities. I've seen firsthand how British personnel are working with other NATO forces to ensure the collective shield that's protected us for 3/4 of a century remains as strong as ever. So I welcome the agreement on the new NATO force model, ensuring over 300,000 conventional troops will be at high readiness across Europe. Can I ask the Prime Minister how this agreement will affect British military planning, and if he believes our extra commitments can be met given his cuts to UK troop numbers? The commitment made at the G7 of further financial support for Ukraine is also welcome, as are plans to help Ukraine with post-war reconstruction through an international conference. Mr. Speaker, there can be no clearer case that aid spending makes Britain more secure and prevents the need for military spending in the future, which demonstrates the folly in reducing our aid commitments at a time of global instability. I'm pleased that unity was on display at both the NATO summit and the G7 summit. But I am concerned about current unity within the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth is a valuable and important institution for this country. It isn't just a symbol of our past. It's important for our future, providing us with influence in all parts of the world. But in recent years, there have been serious signs of strain. When many major Commonwealth countries abstained at the UN over Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the summit should have been an opportunity to widen diplomatic coalition against Putin. Instead, the Prime Minister waged a divisive campaign against the Commonwealth leadership that ended up in a humiliating diplomatic failure, only illustrating his embarrassing lack of influence. Instead of investing in aid that strengthens the alliance, he's cut it. Instead of upholding the rule of law that should define the Commonwealth, he reneges on treaties that he's signed, undermining Britain's moral and political credibility when we need our word to carry trust. My fear is simple. The vacuum we leave behind will be quickly filled, not by those who share our values, but by those who seek to destroy them. We cannot let that happen in Ukraine. We cannot let that happen anywhere. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank the right honourable gentleman for the terms in which, broadly speaking, he has addressed the UK's recent diplomatic activity. Just a couple of points to come back on. He talks about the UK breaking international treaties, Mr. Speaker. Actually, that is, I don't know what he's talking about there, but he's talking about what we're doing in respect to the Northern Ireland Protocol. Then that is not what is happening, Mr. Speaker. We believe that our obligation, our prior obligation, which I would have thought he supported, is to the balance of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. That's what we're supporting. And actually, he talks about the UK's ability to win people over. It was very striking, Mr. Speaker, in the conversations I had with leaders from around the world, how few of them, if any, raised the issue, Mr. Speaker, of the Northern Ireland Protocol, and how much, Mr. Speaker, people want to see common sense and no new barriers to trade. What the UK is doing is trying to reduce pointless barriers to trade, and you would have thought, Mr. Speaker, that he would support that. And on his points about the UK's contribution to NATO and to the new force model, and whether that is sustainable. I really suggest, Mr. Speaker, that members opposite should talk to the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg about what the UK is producing and what the UK is committing. It is colossal. We are the second biggest contributor to NATO. We're the second biggest contributor overall to support for the Ukrainians, Mr. Speaker, of 2.3 billion in military assistance alone. And what we're also doing, Mr. Speaker, is making sure that our armed forces are provided for the future with £24 billion in this spending review, the biggest uplift in defence spending since the Cold War. Defence spending now running at 2.3% of our national GDP, above the 2% target, Mr. Speaker. That is felt around the room in NATO. People know what the UK is contributing, and they are extremely grateful. What the UK also contributes to NATO, under the new force model, we will contribute virtually all our naval forces, Mr. Speaker. But we also, as he knows, we are the only country to contribute our strategic independent nuclear deterrent to NATO. And I still find it a sad reflection on the party opposite that at this critical time when Vladimir Putin is very sadly using the language of nuclear blackmail, we are in a situation in which the principal party of opposition in this country still has 8 members on its front bench who voted to discard our independent nuclear deterrent, Mr. Speaker, including the shadow foreign secretary. So apart from that, Mr. Speaker, I welcome the terms in which the right honourable gentleman has responded.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Could I very much welcome the Prime Minister's statement? Could I ask the Prime Minister, was there general agreement at all 3 summits that our fragile rules-based order is under threat, and strategically we've entered a profound era of geopolitical change? Could I commend the Prime Minister's efforts in Ukraine? It's a shame other NATO countries haven't lent as much as we've done. But could I commend or encourage the Prime Minister to go further and to secure a UN General Assembly resolution to create a humanitarian safe haven around that critical port of Odessa, so those vital grain exports can not only reach Europe, but also Africa and prevent famine there?
Prime Minister.
I thank my right honourable friend for his point, particularly about grain exports, and as he knows, the work is being led by the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. The UK is doing a huge amount to support Mr. Speaker, but as I've told the House before, we may have to prepare for a solution that does not depend upon Russian consent, because that may not be forthcoming.
SNP Leader Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Prime Minister for an advance copy of his statement and welcome him back from his travels around Africa and Europe. And it's perhaps worth reiterating, Mr. Speaker, that all of us in this House reiterate our support for President Zelensky, for Ukraine, in their struggle against the war criminal Putin. Mr. Speaker, the scale and the depth of the...
Prime Minister, clearly just heard from Boris Johnson and indeed from Keir Starmer. Prime Minister talking about that increase in defence spending by the end of the decade up to 2.5%. That $30 billion for the G7 that's been essentially sent or will be pledged to Ukraine this year. But, you know, Keir Starmer, they're clearly having a little pop at the Prime Minister, talking about how the absence makes the heart grow fonder, given the fact that the Prime Minister's been out of the country for 9 days at a pretty tricky time for him. Coming up, though, in a couple of minutes, because we're coming to the end of this programme, we've got Colin Brazier in, 7 minutes' time, top of the hour. I must say, by the way, it was notable how few MPs were in that chamber.
Where are they all,
on both sides during what was the Prime Minister's statement. It is an interesting thing, isn't it? I was trying to pick up with Michael Fabricant here, and it's been talked about all weekend, the parallels with the 1990s. I mean, can we really do this? Is it a thing? It certainly seems that the government is in a bit of a rut with kind of week after week of kind of sleaze allegations, if you like.
I remember when I was at the Yorkshire Post interviewing Martin Amis, the novelist, who said you should avoid the decimalisation of history, bracketing it into decades as if that the 1970s had a particular character, the 1990s had a particular character. Nonetheless, I'm about to do that.
We are. Well, maybe we should say that we should say the last chunk of Conservative government.
Well, I'll tell you what I am going to do. Not the 1990s, the noughties, then specifically the year 2000, which was the year of those fuel protests organised by, amongst others, the farmer David Handley. I've got him on at 5. I want to know what he thinks about the protests that have been happening today. Not so much the tanker drivers, the lorry drivers that he helped organise. This is more ordinary motorists who are just sick of paying 45p in the pound directly to the taxman. Is this a turning point? Are we looking at something that resembles a little bit the yellow vest movement in France? Are ordinary folk sick and tired of a tax burden we haven't seen, not since the 1990s, the 70s, but the 1940s?
And it is extraordinary, this, isn't it, when you look at kind of what... And I put this to the Prime Minister a couple of weeks ago, and I suspect we may well see movement on it, is that it got 5p, or 6p if you include VAT of duty, but elsewhere in Europe they've got 15, 20, 25p
I didn't know that.
in
Right.
countries.
Wow.
In fact, Italy, Germany, Ireland, France have got much more, and I suspect the government is going to become under an awful lot of pressure to at least do a little bit more.
I've got time to make a broader point just about how we do our jobs.
You've got 40 seconds.
Brilliant. Well, I mean, you will agree with me on this, I'm sure, and our viewers, if they think about it, will too. I think very often our media conversations are really parochial, Darren. I think too little do we look to what's happening in Europe. You have a conversation about the NHS. Oh, we look at the way they do things in America. What about the way they do things in Sweden or Germany or Portugal? We tend not to look.
Or nearest neighbours. No, I'm a big fan of concentrating lots more on what happens, whatever you think about our continent, essentially, than necessarily elsewhere. Right, we'll be tuning in just a couple of minutes, top of the hour. Thank you, Colin. That is it from me for the briefing for today. Of course, Tom is back at 9:30 in the morning. I'll be back at 3 in the afternoon. As I say, Colin is up next between 4 and 6, and there'll be continued coverage of that debate or that statement in Parliament in the hours to come. We'll leave you with the weather from the Met Office. I'll see you again tomorrow. Have a nice afternoon.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. A lot of cloud across the UK today with showers in the north, but mostly fine in the south where some brighter spells are coming through from time to time. Low pressure sits to the north of the UK, just beside Iceland. High pressure to the west, that's trying to move in, and it will eventually bring more settled weather more widely later this week. But for the time being, it's fairly cool, it's fairly changeable out there.